Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Glover. I'm a clinical fellow with the Suffolk University Legal Information and Technology Lab, the LIT Lab. Clinical fellow doesn't really tell you what I do, but I work on the document assembly line project. I suppose I'm like the project coordinator of that. And to that end, I want to teach you all how to use DocAssemble so that you can help us with updating and maintaining the interviews that we build, which you can find on courtformsonline.org. That's the website where we publish all the interviews that we build. And we've asked for your help keeping those up to date, solving bugs, improving them, general maintenance, updating forms, that kind of stuff. And to do that, you're going to need to learn how to code. We've said it before, but I'll say it again. You do not need to know anything about coding before you start today. This is going to be enough to get you started. It's not going to be enough to get you the whole way because coding is a journey. I'm learning, I get stuck all the time, I run into problems, but I'm going to teach you how to get started so that you can get stuck on a harder problem than how do I do this? And then we'll help you move past that problem and keep going. So in order to follow along today, because that's what I hope you'll do. I hope you'll have your own DocAssemble Playground window open, that you'll be doing the same things that I'm doing at the same time I'm doing them. And so that you can follow along and make sure that you're getting it, that it's getting in. This is obviously recorded, so you can rewind it and watch it again. I hope you're watching this with someone like our amazing volunteer, Michelle, or someone from our community like Amanda. But if you're watching it on your own, that's fine too. If you need to pause and get help, you can use the coding help forum in our Microsoft Teams discussion forum. You can come to our Monday meetings, or you can just reach out in another way. But those are the preferred ways. So to get started today, you'll need a couple of things. You will need access to the DocAssemble Playground is the main thing. And so let's go ahead and share my screen and get into that. To get access to the DocAssemble Playground, you'll go to apps-dev.suffolklitlab.org and create an account. And then you'll have to email litlab@suffolk.edu and request developer permissions. We'll give you those, and then you'll be in. So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video now, go ahead and take care of that. The other thing you'll want is to get support from us, is you'll want access to the our document assembly line team, and you'll need an invitation from us for that too. So if you haven't already got that, go ahead and include that request in your email where you ask for developer permissions. For getting help, you'll want to get familiar with the assemblyline.suffolklitlab.org website. And if you click on Get Started and Resources, you'll find a number of resources to get help. Use them. Coding, like I said, is a journey, and that journey is a journey of getting stuck and unstuck and stuck and unstuck repeatedly. So use these resources. The main ones are come to our Monday morning meetings, and definitely use the coding help channel in Teams. Those are the two most effective ways. That and come to office hours. Our volunteer, Michelle, does weekly office hours, usually on Tuesday and Thursdays. The meeting schedule is posted in the document assembly line team, in both in general and in coding help, and where you can also sign up for the Monday meetings and things like that. So you can find the schedule there. Let's get started. So when you first jump into the playground, you're going to see something like this probably. Let's go ahead and create a new project. Go to Playground and Manage Projects and create a new project. And we'll call this DocAssemble Training. And why did I spell it this way? Well, you can't have spaces in project names, and we're using Pascal case, which is you capitalize the first letter of each word. You can find more information about this in the documentation. Under name formats, you'll see the different cases. Snake case and Pascal case are the ones you're going to use most frequently. So I'll save that project, and we'll jump into a blank new project. We're going to name our first file main.yaml, not YML, sorry. Our convention is to name it main. You'll find in most of our repositories that isn't true, that the main YAML is not named main, because that's a fairly recent style convention that we've arrived at. A lot of times it'll be named something else. And when we get to our third session, you'll see more about that. And then we'll go ahead and save. Today, by the way, we're just going to do some basic introduction to DocAssemble. In the session 2, we'll start doing document assembly. And in session 3, we're going to cover the document assembly line tool, the AL Weaver, where we can start from a form rather than starting from code. But first, we're going to start from code so we understand how that works. Then we're going to flip it and use the document assembly line tools. We'll get more comfortable with the document assembly line draft interviews that it generates. And then we'll introduce the GitHub workflow, which will be essential to volunteering with us. And we will preview the final project. So we'll get to those things later. Today, we're just doing DocAssemble basics, just how to work within a DocAssemble interview. So the first thing we're going to do is let's just get it to do something. And the traditional way that we make software do something is just to try to say hello, hello world, or just hello is all we'll do. And my goal here is to demystify coding a little bit for you. Because I know coming to it with little or no knowledge of it, you may be thinking that it just feels like cryptic. But if you have any experience with the law, which probably most of you do, legal code is analogous. It is also cryptic to people with no experience. So let's just start. A DocAssemble interview is a series of questions. You gather information from users and you use it to assemble a document. And so first we need to ask those questions. So let's start by asking a question. And let's just, instead of a question, let's just say hello. So we can save and we'll see the interview file does not have an endpoint. This isn't red, it's a sort of a yellow warning, but we can try and save and run it too and see what happens. It'll say it's finished executing all code blocks marked as initial or mandatory and finished asking all questions marked as mandatory, which is our clue to what we didn't do. We didn't call it a mandatory question. And so the way we can do that is just say mandatory true. And now we can try and save it again. Yep, so that goes away. And now we've said hello. Easy enough. We can make the interview generate a page that says hello, and we know how to say something is mandatory. Okay, easy enough. Let's go a little further. Let's start doing some actual questions. So for our first question, maybe it's a little more useful to ask for somebody's name. So let's say, instead of hello, let's say, what is your name? And we'll leave it as mandatory. And I'm going to move mandatory up one there, just so it's out of the way. So what we didn't have before, we just said hello. It was just a heading. We want to have a field where somebody can enter their name. So we'll use the keyword or the modifier fields. And now we hit enter, and we have to tab in to the list of fields. It is fields plural, even if there's only one field. And there will often be only one field. So we'll call it full name, and we'll use full underscore name. What's going on here is on the left is the label for that field. That's the thing that's going to show up above next to the field and say, enter your full name here. And this is a variable. If you haven't encountered variables before, variables are just containers. In this case, it's going to hold a string of text of numbers and letters and spaces and things like that. Variables can be Boolean, they can be true or false. And they can be other things too. They can hold objects and arrays and stuff like that. But most of the variables we're going to be using are simple strings or Booleans, true or false, or just a string of text, numbers, things like that. The variables on the right, the labels on the left. Let's save and run. There you go. What is your name? Full name. I'll give it my actual full name. And if I click continue, now we're going to get that same error. Essentially what the error means is we finished the interview and there's nothing else to do. There's nothing else that you've told us I have to do anyway. So let's give it something else to do. 3 hyphens is how we distinguish one question from another, or one block from another. So we put those in. And we'll give it another question. Let's say hi. And we want to say hi to the person whose name we've just learned, right? That's how we often greet people in real life. And the way we do that is we have to, so we've given, when it fills in, let's just do that real quick. So when it fills in my name, now the full underscore name variable like I said, it was a container. That full underscore name is just the name of the variable. And now that variable is holding the value Sam, capital S, Sam, space, capital G, Glover. And when I push continue, we've stored that variable, that value in that variable. And now we want to push it back. And so the way we do that is we use what's called Mako case. For what it's worth, we're writing in YAML right now, which is called yet another markup language. And now I'm going to add Mako, which is another kind of markup. And that says what we're going to do in between these brackets is code. So if we just did this, if we just did hi full name, we haven't told it that that's a variable. So it's just reading that as text characters. So if I save and run that, oh, and we didn't mark it mandatory. Let's mark it mandatory. We know we need to do that. And let's try and save and run again. Close that other window. So you see, it just spits it back out as full name. So if we use those other characters there, that Mako syntax, $, curly brace, and we put spaces around it for readability. So now if we save and run it, you could pause here and say, what do you think is going to happen? But I'm just going to show you. Now it spits my name back at me. It repeats my name back at me. It doesn't spit, it's a program. Now it returns the value of my name. So we've said, store my name as full name, and then send it back to me, show it back to me that way, okay? So we learned a couple of basic things here. We've seen some errors and what they look like. We've got one error, that mandatory code block error. Now we know what to do with that. Let's go over some other question types. So, and in order to do this, let's try and do something a little more interesting than just what is your name. So instead of what is your name, well, we could still ask what is your name, but instead of saying hi to somebody, let's try and send back something more interesting. Like, let's imagine we're taking a witness statement. So let's call this block mandatory true. And let's remove the mandatory true from this one, and I'll explain why as I'm going here. So for the question, we're going to put a vertical pipe here, and what that vertical pipe says is continue on the next line. Basically, it lets me use a block of text instead of just one line of text for the question. So let's call it statement of full name, and then let's take statement. Let's make it an incident description. And so what I've got here is a mandatory code block, or a mandatory question block. And that mandatory question block includes this full name variable and an incident description variable. Now, when I run this, what's going to happen is docassemble, well, you can stop and predict what's going to happen. That's a good way to learn to code and learn what's going to happen. Here's what I predict is going to happen, because I know a little bit more about how docassemble works. Docassemble doesn't run in order necessarily. It runs in the order of its need to get the variable. So it's going to get here and it's going to say, I need the variable of the value of full name. Do I have a question that will help me define that variable? And it's going to find this question. It's going to say, yep, okay, here's a question that defines the variable full name. So I better ask that. And it's going to get to incident description, and it's going to say, okay, is there a question that does that? And it's not going to find one yet because I haven't written one. So let's save and run and see if that's what happens. Okay. Yep. So there's a reference to a variable that could not be looked up in the question file or any of the files incorporated by reference, which will make more sense in session 3. So it went looking for it, didn't find it. So let's write a question. Let's say describe what happened, or let's call it about the event. And we'll do fields, describe what happened. And we'll use that incident description. So you may ask, why do we have to use Mako tags here and why not here? And that's because the structure of the markup here, it knows that what's on the left is the label and what's on the right is going to be the name of the variable. Here, we're trying to output text, and we have to say in the middle of text, stop, and output the value of the variable rather than the name of the variable. So that's why we're using the markup here. I hope that makes sense. So now if we click save and run, it's going to ask for our name and description of what happened. And it's going to say statement of Sam Glover stuff. What did I do? What I did was I'm actually not sure why it showed up that way. It should have it probably should have given me a return there. But it didn't. That's all right. It did put it out. It did put stuff in there, so I got what I wanted. Just didn't do it quite what I was expecting. But that's all right. We can troubleshoot that too. But let's demonstrate some more question types. And I guess there's another way I could do this, but we're going to do it this way right now. Let's do. We've already seen how to do a list in one way. Let's do a list another one. Let's add a date. And what you're noticing obviously that I'm adding some other things. So hold on, I'm gonna talk about that. This markup here, let's make this a heading explicitly to, which then says that the things below it aren't a heading, and maybe that's what happened there. Now I'm using another markup language called Markdown. So we've got YAML, we've got Mako, and now we've got Markdown. You're learning to code in several languages here. That's because then this is normal. Usually you have different languages in the same thing sometimes, because that is just how coding works. We need to be able to express different things differently. These are heading level. So this is a second level heading because there's 2 hash marks. If I use one, it'll be a first level heading, which is usually only the title of the page, and so on. This hyphen says that we're in a list, and these asterisks say make this bold. If it were one asterisk on either side, it'd be in italics. Okay. We're not going to see anything yet because we need another question. And the question here will be, when did it happen? We could say, what date was the incident? But that sounds like a cop asking a question. And we try to ask things in plain language, like, when did it happen? And for when did it happen, let's see, we have asked the question, when did it happen? Now, we could just have a field where somebody can enter whatever date they want. But what we want to do is we want to use like a date picker, right? When it pops up the calendar and you can select the date, because we want to have a date, not, I said there's different variable types. We have strings, we have Booleans. We can also have a date, which means a month and a day and a year. And if you think, why do we need that? Because in Europe, they put the day before the month. And in the US, we put the month before the day. So we need a structured date markup that we can output it in the way that makes sense for the person who's viewing it. We also want to be able to compute the number of days between things. In order to do that, some months have 28 days, some have 30, some have 31, sometimes there's 29. We have weekends and weekdays. And so we need a date that is different than just a string of text. In this case, it might not matter, but maybe it does. So we want to actually use a date. So let's do that. Let's do a select the event date. And we'll use that incident date variable. And now we need to change the type of, now I said we have different variable types. So this is a type, the data is going to be different. So we're going to use a data type, and we're going to just call it a date. If you're looking back over the code that we've written so far, hopefully this is very readable. That's one of the reasons we say that anybody can learn to code. This is pretty readable. There are things that matter here. This indentation matters. This indentation says these are fields. This is a list of fields. This indentation says that all of this text goes underneath the question heading. All of that stuff does matter. but you can figure that out. It's no more specific than legal code, I don't think. It's very specific on typography, but hey, if you've been through the Blue Book, this is no more finicky than the Blue Book, and maybe even less. So let's save and run and see how this shows up. I'm going to stop typing my name every time. I'm going to use a little extension that's called Fake Filler. I just click it and it throws in some text, and it recognizes that this is a name, in fact. So you can get this extension for Chrome and Firefox. Just look for the extension library. It's easy to find. I think there's a version of it for Safari and other browsers too, but yeah. So now you see we have select the date, and we have a date picker. It's going to use a standard date object, and continue. And there we go. Now we have a list with the date, our statement, a heading. And now it's formatted the way I expected. I think the way it did that is the reason it did that is because this is, now that I've explicitly said this is a heading, it knows the stuff underneath doesn't have to be. I'm not positive, but there are other ways I could do this, but this is fine. It gets us where we need to go. You'll also notice that it asked my name, and then it asked for the date before it asked for the description. Even though in the order here, it's name, description, date, it asked name, date, description. The reason is because in my mandatory question, it asked for name, date, description. So the mandatory block, if the best practice would have one mandatory block, and the mandatory block we use always to call the questions in order, the order that we want them. So this is the order that they appear, in the mandatory block. Let's change the incident description. Now I like them to appear in the same order, so let's go ahead and reorder this. I like to be organized in my code as well as my mandatory block. It doesn't have to be, but I like to be organized. Let's do another type of thing here. We can also modify the field with input type and make it an area, a text area, so we can give somebody more room to type their description. So you can select a date again. Doesn't have to be yesterday. And now we have a bigger text block for what happened. I can't type. So let's click continue. And there we go. It still works the same way, but we get that nice bigger text box. All right, let's add one more thing here, and we're going to add a Boolean for did you see what happened? Were you an eyewitness? Right, that's important to a statement. Think of what are Booleans useful for? Checkboxes, for example, are true or false. It's either checked or not checked. That's what Boolean means. It's true or false. So we can, and let's just give it we're going to call the variable eyewitness. Why not? Simple enough. So I like keeping things in order. So I'm going to add a new question block under here. Were you an eyewitness? And for our fields too, now we're going to do fields, and we're going to add a question. Now, sometimes we don't want to have a label. I'm not sure what I would put here for a label other than repeating the question, were you an eyewitness? So you can also just say no label. And sometimes that makes sense. Here, there's no reason, I don't need any other explanation than were you an eyewitness? So I can just say no label and then use my variable. And now we're going to have a new data type. And this one we're going to use yes, no, radio. Radio buttons mean you can only select one of them. And you'll see what that looks like in a moment here. You'll notice we have two things, data type and input type. This text area, it changes the type of the input to make it a bigger text box, but we're still just taking a string of letters and numbers and text. Here we're changing the type of data we're asking for. The yes, no radio asks for a Boolean. The date asks for a date object, whereas the standard is just a string. And so hopefully that makes a little bit of a distinction. It turns out that if you accidentally type data type instead of input type, it will still work. Because it used to be less, it used to not be differentiated. Why is there a space here and not here? I think it just because it was programmed that way. Not sure how much thought went into that. So we'll do the same things we did before. Now it's going to ask, were you an eyewitness? So these are radio buttons, which means you can check one or the other, not both of them. Let's just say yes and hit continue. We'll describe what happened. We can keep using our fake filler. It'll just throw in some lorem ipsum there. So now it says eyewitness true or false. That's acceptable here. We could maybe do it more elegant. We could type out where they were an eyewitness or not, but we don't need to. This is perfectly readable. Okay. So we've covered a few different variable types of questions here. We've covered, well, let's do it again. We've covered a name, but which is just a string of text. We've done a date object. So let's take it, a question and ask it and give people a date picker and format it as an actual date. And if we were in, what's kind of neat about DocAssemble is if this is being shown to somebody in Europe, it'll know that based on the browser codes and things like that, the context, and it would flip, it'd be 1.9 instead of 9.1. The data is the same. The way it outputs it and displays it to the user is different, which is pretty cool. So that's a date. We've done a date. We've done a Boolean, yes, no radios. And we've made our text area bigger to hold more stuff, make it easier to type in. There we go. And we've made a statement. We also learned a couple of other things. We've learned about the mandatory code block and why that we should have one code block, one mandatory block, I'm sorry. And we also learned how to not have a label on an input. So that's quite a lot already, and we're not done yet. So let's learn a couple more things. First, we're going to talk about how we order the interview. You'll notice I said the way DocAssemble works is it goes in the order of its need for the variable in the mandatory block. And so what we can do instead of this is we can actually just have a block that sets the interview order and make that the mandatory block. So I'm going to take this out. Actually, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to copy this for the moment. And I'm going to change this from a question block to a code block. And in the code, I'm just going to have the order of the variables. And because it's a code block, I no longer need the Mako tags. Everything in here is code. And why I'm using the variables here to specify the interview order. I'm saying, get these variables in this order. So, and I like to do sort of a heading on this to make it easy to find. You'll notice these are green hash marks. These are not the same as the headings that we had before. These are comments. So this is commenting it out. It means just ignore this line. You only need one hash mark at the beginning, but I use a bunch of them to call it out here. So this is my mandatory block now. It's going to call all of these in order. But we still want to have that output at the end, right? If we just run this, we're going to get that same error that says we finished everything and there's nothing else for us to do. So let's add to the end. Let's move our output to the end. Now our question is at the end. And if we save and run, what we'll see, I mean, spoiler alert, we're going to see another error, but it's useful to see it. So we still got that it finished asking all questions, that mandatory error. Let's go back one. Well, we will go back one in a moment. So the reason is because it finished this mandatory block. It asked for all of these questions. It got all these variables, and it had no need to go here. There was no reason for it to go here. So what we need to do is we need to actually explicitly call this. There's a couple different ways that we can do it. The way I'm going to do it, we could make it mandatory, but then that kind of well, the best practice is to have one mandatory block, and that should be our interview order. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to give it an event modifier, and we'll just call it show statement. This functions like a variable in our interview order. So I can take that show statement and add it to my interview order and save. You don't always have to go save and run. Sometimes you can just come back and reload. There we go. Now it outputs it the way we're expecting. Great. So we just learned how to specify the interview order, which is, it is what you're always going to do in your interviews, probably. You can do it implicitly by just having that, here's what I want to do at the end. And that could be your attachment block or something else, but it's usually clearer to you and to other people who might look at your code, because we're usually handing off our code to even somebody else, even if it's just future us. So it's just clearer this way. So the last thing we're going to do today is do dynamic questions. How do we use logic in our interviews? Show this question instead of this question. Show, or in this case, we're just going to start very simply with how do we customize the question so that it is clear to the user? So when we asked if they're an eyewitness, we've asked if they're an eyewitness, and then we just say, describe what happened. Well, maybe it would be nice to customize that to what we know about them if they're an eyewitness. So let's get rid of this, and we'll use that vertical pipe again to let us do it in multiple lines. And what we want to say is, if they're an eyewitness, describe what you saw. And if they aren't an eyewitness, describe what you heard, let's say. So we want to say, and we've already asked the question, are they an eyewitness? So we know that. And what we want to be able to do is say, if you're an eyewitness, describe what you saw. Otherwise, describe what you heard. So here's how we do that. This % is another Mako markup thing. And now we can use logical code. So we want to say if eyewitness, we're basically just writing out what I just said. If eyewitness equals true, colon. So if the eyewitness variable has been set to true, that's what the double equals means. A single equals sets the value again. So we don't want to do that. We want to say, if the value of eyewitness is true, we use a double equals, colon, do this. And then we can just say else, colon, do this. And then we need to type an end if to end our block. And now what should happen is if they're an eyewitness, if that is set to true, describe what you saw. Otherwise, describe what you heard. You'll see sometimes we could maybe write this more clearly by is eyewitness. Doesn't matter what we name the variable, it just matters that we're consistent. There are some reserved names, and you can see that in our documentation. But naming variables is for our convenience. We want the variable to make sense in the way we're using it. So it might even be clear to say, if is eyewitness true, because that reads more like what we're trying to say. But we would need to remember to come down here and change it to is eyewitness here and is eyewitness here. So you have to be consistent through your interview. So let's try that. And describe what you saw, describe what you heard. Now to say describe what happened again seems silly. So let's use that no label again. And it'll actually nicely tidy up the page as well. So let's save and run. So what is your name? Comes up with some good names, Quincy Holder. You can use it here too. It'll come with a random date. Were you an eyewitness? Let's say yes. Describe what you saw. And now you see we have a nice big box here. That's a little nicer. Or if we say no, describe what you heard. Cool. It's exactly what we wanted to happen. You can also use that to change the logic elsewhere. And where we usually change that is up here in the interview order. So what we might want to do is say, if they're an eyewitness, we want their statement. If not, we don't need it. We don't care. So what we could say is, after we ask for the is eyewitness, we could say, and now we're in a code block, so we don't need to use the Mako tags. We could say, if is eyewitness, ask for the incident description. And you notice we have to indent here. And we don't have to use an end if formally, but we can. Sometimes it's clear that way. So we only want to ask for the incident description if they're an eyewitness. I think I know what's going to happen here. All right. So we've gotten a date. See if they're, let's say we're not an eyewitness, then we shouldn't see the interview statement. Oh, I'm not supposed to use the end if there. Well, that's good to know. So let's save that and come back and we'll reload that, see if it reloads. Okay, say no. Why didn't that work? It shouldn't show the incident description because of here. What about here? We've still required the incident description. So we would need to do the exact same thing here. So the incident description. And we need the end if again here. Let's save that and make sure. Okay. So let's go back. Were you an eyewitness? No. There we go. Now we skipped it. So sometimes you have to do things in multiple places. And there are other ways that we could have done this, but now you've seen how to do it in the output when we're showing, displaying something to the user. You could do the same thing later on in the attachment blocks. We can change it in the code order. And we can also change it in the question heading or the question label. You can do it there too. Okay. I think that's enough for today. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Next session, we're going to talk about how to start assembling documents. And so far, we're working in vanilla DocAssemble. But then in session 3, we're going to introduce the assembly line tools, including the Weaver, especially the Weaver, and the question library. We're going to do the GitHub workflow, and we're going to talk about the final project more. That's it for now. I hope you've been watching this with somebody who can help you troubleshoot, or that you've been going to get troubleshooting. I hope you've been following along and making sure that what you're doing matches what I'm doing, and figuring out why not, if not. And I hope you're having fun. And we'll see you soon.